John Denver eased his pickup off the highway and onto the main street of Halloran, Colorado, a little after 4 in the afternoon on December 14th, 1974, because the snow had started coming sideways and because he could not stand one more mile alone with his own thinking. He had spent 3 days in Denver under hot television lights, taping a Christmas special, singing about hearth and home into a camera lens while 40 people checked their watches. It had gone fine. Everybody said so. But driving up toward Aspen afterward, he had felt that old hollow thing he could never quite explain, the ache of a man who sings about home all day and then goes back to a highway. He pulled his knit cap low over his ears, pushed his glasses up his nose, and told himself he had only stopped for coffee. Halloran was 2 blocks long and dressed for Christmas the way small towns did it back then, tinsel taped inside the 5 and dime window, colored bulbs sagging between the lampposts. A Sinclair station sat at one end and a white clapboard church at the other, its steeple going gray in the falling light. Somebody's radio was playing carols out an open door. John had walked maybe 30 feet from his truck toward the diner sign when he heard something underneath all of it that stopped him dead with his hands still in his pockets. A guitar, badly out of tune, and a young man's voice, cracked with cold, singing, "Take me home, country roads." He did not move. The singer sat on an upturned wooden crate in the doorway of the 5 and dime, tucked back out of the wind, 18 years old or thereabouts. He had a man's hands already, split across the knuckles the way hands get from loading feed sacks in the cold, and he was fighting those hands for every chord. At his feet sat a coffee can with a few coins in it. What held John there while the cold worked up through his boots was that the young man was not performing for anybody. Nobody was watching. He was singing that song the way a man says a prayer alone in a room, and he meant every word of it. Nobody standing on that street as the light went out of the sky knew that the next 2 hours would change 2 lives, or that Halloran would tell this story every Christmas for 30 years afterward. If quiet stories about ordinary kindness still mean something to you, subscribe, because there are not many places left that bother telling them. John crossed over slow, the way you approach a deer at the edge of a field, and lowered himself onto the cold step beside the crate without making a production of it. He did not say a word until the song was finished. His cap was down over his ears, his glasses half fogged, snow melting in his hair, and in a coat like that he might have been any man in that county. "Mind if I sit a spell?" he said finally. "Wind's got teeth on it today." The young man shrugged without looking over. "It's a free sidewalk," he said. "That's a fine old song," John said, blowing into his cupped hands. "You play it better than most." That got a short, tired laugh. "Mister, I've got 3 strings that hold and 3 that don't. Nobody plays anything good on this." John studied the instrument, an old flat top with a hairline crack running out from the bridge and a nut shimmed with a folded matchbook. "Well," John said, "I've heard $900 guitars in fancy rooms with less honest sound than that, and I once watched a fella pay $60 for a haircut worse than mine, so what do I know?" That earned him half a smile. Quick, gone again. "What's your name, friend?" John asked. "Wyatt," he said. "Wyatt Kell." He glanced over then, sizing the man up the way a young man does when he is deciding whether to be bothered. All he saw was a fellow in round glasses with wheat-colored hair sticking out under a wool cap, hands as red as his own. "You a school teacher or something?" John laughed out loud at that and pushed his glasses back up his nose. "Something like that," he said. "I'm John. How long you been sitting out here in this?" "Since 2 o'clock, Wyatt said. "Ruby lets me use the doorway long as I don't block it. There's no unloading work in December, so this is what there is." He tipped his chin at the can. $23.60 since Thanksgiving. What I make on the trucks goes to my mother, every dollar, and that's how it ought to be. This is the only money that's mine to aim at anything." He said it flat, no self-pity in it anywhere, a grown man reporting facts. "That's a hard way to earn it," John said carefully. "What are you aiming at, if it's any of my business?" Wyatt was quiet a good while, and the snow came down between them, and somewhere down the block, a tire chain rattled over a curb. "My granddad's guitar," he said. "It's back home in West Virginia, in a house that goes to auction on January 18th. John did not jump on that. He let the words sit out in the cold until Wyatt went on by himself, which is how you get the truth out of anybody, young or old. "Sago Fork," Wyatt said. "That's home. The mill shut down in March, my last spring of school, and there wasn't any work left to hunt, so we came out here to my aunt's. I finished my senior year in a school where I didn't know one person, and I walked across that stage in May in front of a gym full of strangers. We live in the 2 rooms behind the laundromat now. $52 a month. Daddy plows the county lot nights and loads trucks days when there's trucks, and I load them alongside him." "And your granddad?" John asked. Wyatt's thumb found the crack in the guitar top and stayed there. "He passed in July," he said. "He wouldn't come out with us. Said he'd been in that house 51 years and he'd finish in it, and he did. His jaw worked once. I didn't get back for the service. Bus was $61 one way and we didn't have it, and I've had to live with that every day since. Nobody could keep up the taxes after he was gone, so the county's selling the place and everything inside goes with the walls. His guitar is still on the hook by the stove where he kept it, and there's a trunk of my grandmother's things. The man at the courthouse said $410 settles the back taxes, which might as well be $410,000 from where I'm sitting." John looked out at the street a moment. He had sat in rooms where people discussed numbers 100 times that size like they were talking weather, and here was a young man in a doorway with $23.60 in a can and a deadline in January. "That song," John said quietly. "Why that one, out of every song there is?" Wyatt turned his whole body toward him for the first time. "Granddad taught me on that guitar," he said. "Started me at 7, out on his porch before I could reach around the neck proper. He'd play it every evening when the shift whistle blew. He couldn't sing worth a nickel and he sang it loud anyway, and there's 2 words at the start he'd about shout." Wyatt stopped. His eyes had gone bright and he was working hard against it, and he pushed his hands down into his sleeves. "Almost heaven. That's what he'd holler, right out over the hollow. And then he'd say, 'Play it till the mountains hear you, Wyatt,' every time. 10 years of evenings, and he never once said it different." John did not answer. Sometimes there's nothing to say, and the only honest thing a man can do is sit still inside it. After a while, he put out his hand. "Would you let me try it? I'll give it right back." Wyatt handed the guitar across, and John turned the pegs by ear as best he could with 3 bad strings, and made a face at the result that got a real laugh out of the young man, and then played the opening of it anyway, low and easy, half under his breath, the way you would sing to somebody in the next room. He got about halfway through before the diner door swung open across the street, and Ruby Salvatore came out into the snow in her apron with 2 cups of coffee and stopped so hard she nearly spilled both. "Mr. Denver," she said loud, the way a woman says a thing she cannot believe she is saying. "Mr. Denver, honey, what in this world are you doing on the cold ground?" Wyatt turned and looked at the man on the step beside him, and the man took off his knit cap, shook out his hair, and gave him a slightly embarrassed grin. "Aw," John said. "Folks make a fuss. I'm just a fellow who got lucky with a couple of songs about mountains." Wyatt did not say anything for so long that John began to worry about him. "You wrote it," he finally said. It was not a question. His voice had gone thin. "Well," John said, handing the guitar back careful as glass, "I helped write it, and I'll tell you a thing that's going to sound crazy, friend. I had never lived one day in West Virginia when we wrote that song. Not one. I wrote about a home I'd never had, because I never had one growing up, and I wanted it so bad I built one out of words." Wyatt just stared at him. John pushed his glasses up his nose and looked out at the street, where the colored bulbs were coming on 1 string at a time. "My daddy was Air Force," he said. "We moved every year or 2 my whole boyhood. Arizona, Alabama, Japan, Texas, always the new one in the thick glasses, and every time I started to know a place we were packing the car again. I graduated in front of a gym full of strangers too, son. I know exactly what that walk feels like. So when I hear you say, 'almost heaven' the way your granddad hollered it off a porch, understand what that is to me. You had the real thing. I only ever had the song about it." "I know what that's like," Wyatt said, so quiet it nearly went under the wind. "I know it well." He wiped his face once with the back of a split-knuckled hand and did not do it again, and John let him have his silence and said nothing about any of it. Across the street, Ruby stood in her doorway with 2 cups of coffee going cold in her hands and had the good sense not to interrupt. "When I was 11, John said after a while, my grandmother put an old guitar in my hands, made in 1910. It was the one thing I owned that didn't get packed into a box every time we moved. At 15, I took that same guitar and lit out for California, and my daddy came and got me, but the road already had a hold of me by then." He looked down at the crack in Wyatt's borrowed flat top. "I sang in rooms for $15 a night for years after that, and folks were singing my songs on the radio before anybody would let me in a door. So I know what's hanging on a hook by a stove in Sago Fork. That isn't a guitar, son. That's the man." John stood and set his cap back on and stamped some feeling into his boots. "Where are your folks at this hour?" Wyatt got up fast, guarded all at once, the coffee can held against his chest. "Sir, I'm 18 years old, and I work for what I get. My daddy would walk me back out here and make me put every cent of it in the church plate, and he'd be right to." John came around to face him square, and there was no joking left in him anywhere. "When nobody knew my name, my grandmother put a guitar in my hands, and strangers carried my songs for me," he said. "This is not charity, Wyatt. It was handed to me, and I'm handing it on, and one day it'll be your turn. Your granddad had it right. Play it till the mountains hear you. Now come on, bring the can, and let's go see Ruby about supper." They ate at the counter of the Silver Spoon, the 2 of them and Wyatt's mother, Doreen, who came over on her break from the motel still in uniform and had to sit down when she saw who was buying. "First we eat," John told her before she could get a word out. Nobody ever figured out their whole life on an empty stomach. He ordered 3 plates of meatloaf at $1.85 apiece and made Doreen laugh twice before he came anywhere near the reason, which was on purpose, because people can only hear a hard kindness after they have been fed. Then he laid it out plain. He was not buying the house in Sago Fork, because a house 1,400 miles from a man's work is a stone around the neck and not a gift. But the $410 in back taxes would be settled by Wednesday, so nothing inside those walls went across an auction block with them. He had a friend named Cass in Aspen who ran a lumber yard and needed a full-time man who could handle a loader, steady work at $3.10 an hour, year-round, starting the first Monday in January, and a second pair of hands, besides if Wyatt wanted Saturdays. And there was a house on Elder Street, 3 bedrooms and a wood stove, $95 a month, with the first 6 months paid. When Doreen started to cry into her napkin, John got very interested in his coffee cup and let her be. "There's 2 conditions," he said, once she could talk again. "No photographs, no names. If anybody in this town ever asks how it happened, you tell them a stranger passed through in a snowstorm and kept going, and that is the whole of it." He turned to Wyatt. "The second one's yours. Your granddad's guitar and your grandmother's trunk go on a freight truck out of Charleston in January, and $140 buys the ride. When it gets here, it's going to need work, after 51 years hanging by a hot stove. You'll see to that yourself, out of your own pocket." He tapped the table once. "That old guitar kept your granddad company. This one's for what comes next, and it's on you now." Cass took the call at the lumber yard at 9 the next morning, listened a good while, and let out the long, slow sigh of a man who had been down this road with his friend more than once. "You're doing it again, John," he said. "Yep," John said. "Can you use them or not?" Cass could. He was making calls before he hung up the phone. Del Kell started at the lumber yard the first Monday in January, and he did not say much about any of it for a good long while, being a proud man out of a proud place. The family moved onto Elder Street on the 11th, and Doreen hung a wreath on a door that was actually theirs for the first time in 10 months. Wyatt worked the yard Saturdays and the feed trucks the rest of the week, and he kept the coffee can on the windowsill where he could see it. The crate came in the second week of February, and it very nearly broke them all. The guitar had ridden 1,400 miles in an unheated trailer through the worst cold of that winter, and when Wyatt got the case open on the kitchen table, the neck had pulled loose at the heel, and the top had opened along the old crack like a book. He stood out on the back step in his shirt sleeves in the snow the better part of an hour and would not come in. For 4 days, the pieces sat on that table looking like the end of something. Then, Doreen called a man named Pell Sorensen over in Glenwood, who had built and mended instruments for 40 years, and Pell drove up on a Saturday and sat at that kitchen table with the pieces in front of him a full hour without saying anything. "This has been played," he said at last, running his thumb along a spot on the neck worn through to bare wood by one man's hand over 5 decades. "You don't throw away wood somebody loved this hard." He charged $65, which took Wyatt 9 weeks of Saturdays to clear, and Dell let his son pay every single dime of it himself, which was the making of that young man. By the first warm week in April, the guitar came home in Pell's arms, and it sounded like nothing else in that house, deep and dry and a little stubborn. Wyatt had to learn the neck all over again, because it was not the flat top, and never would be. In March, there had been a call from a payphone somewhere in Nebraska, brief, just checking in, and in May, a second one, and out of that came 4 hours booked in a small Denver studio on a Tuesday morning in June, paid for, no contract and no promises, nothing but a young man and a 60-year-old guitar and an engineer who knew his business. Wyatt drove home that evening with a reel of tape on the seat beside him, the first thing he had ever owned that was made out of his own sound. By the county fair in August, he was playing paid dates, $25 here and $40 there, Grange halls and church suppers, and one long hot Saturday on the little stage by the pie tent, where Ruby paid him out of the register and told anybody who would listen that she had known him when. In the fall, a small package with no return address turned up on the porch with 2 sets of good strings inside, and nothing written on it. Del Kell never once asked who it came from. He set it on the table, looked at it a long while, and went out to split wood. The following December, on a Sunday evening, 4 days short of a year since a man in a knit cap sat down on a cold step, the church at the end of Halloran's main street held its Christmas program in the basement, folding chairs edge to edge, coffee in a big steel urn, every family in town packed in out of the weather. Wyatt Kell, 19 now, came up front with his granddad's guitar and played "Take Me Home, Countryroads" for a room that had watched him play it for coins in a doorway the winter before. 2 boys he had taught on Saturday afternoons, since September, sat in the front row mouthing the chord changes, and before he started, he leaned down and told them the only thing worth telling. "Play it till the mountains hear you." At the back of the room, near the stairs, a man in a wool cap stood with his hands in his pockets for the length of exactly 1 song. When Wyatt looked up at the end, the man tipped his chin once, and by the time the room finished standing and clapping, the stairwell was empty. Nobody in Halloran ever got the story out of the Kell family, though half the town had a fair guess. "A stranger came through in a snowstorm," Wyatt would say, every single time anybody asked, right on into his 40s. That's about all there is to it. The shipping tag off that freight crate is still nailed above the doorway in the kitchen on Elder Street, brown paper gone brittle, the Charleston stamp still legible in the corner. On the back of it, in a quick hand, somebody wrote that a home is not a place a man is given, but a place he keeps playing for until it answers him. Underneath the tag, on 2 iron hooks, Del Kell set into the wall himself, hangs an old flat-top guitar out of Sago Fork, West Virginia, worn through to bare wood along the neck by one man's hand across 51 years, and by his grandson's hand across all the years since. Some kindnesses were never meant to be famous. They are meant to be handed down quiet, the way a song gets handed down, from a porch to a doorway to a church basement full of folding chairs, until nobody can remember who started it, and everybody is still singing. Share this story with somebody who needs it today, and tell us in the comments about a kindness you never forgot.